Something was off. I knew it. In the early years of our marriage, my wife greeted me with warm smiles, tight hugs, and an eagerness that always felt genuine. But now, those moments were long gone. She barely looked at me anymore. Her eyes stayed glued to her phone, her fingers typing away like her life depended on it. In bed, she'd turn her back to me, pretending to be asleep before I could even say goodnight. She had grown distant, cold, and withdrawn. The excuses piled up too: sudden late-night work meetings, last-minute weekend plans, and calls that ended the moment I walked into the room. At first, I lied to myself. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. And soon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't even trying to hide her betrayal. She didn't bother with subtlety, barely reacting when I'd ask where she had been or why she was so distracted. Her once loving eyes, which once softened whenever they met mine, now sparkled for someone else. I couldn't let this slide. Not without proof. I needed undeniable evidence, something so solid that she wouldn't have a chance to twist the truth. So, I made a plan. Hidden cameras, small, discreet, almost impossible to spot. I placed them carefully, in the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen. I left no blind spots. For the first few days, nothing happened. I spent late nights reviewing the footage, only to see her pacing the house, checking her phone. I started to wonder, maybe I was wrong. But then that night came. I had told her I was out of town on a business trip, but the cameras were rolling. The footage showed the front door unlocking just past midnight. A man entered the house, her lover. My stomach twisted. His face wasn't fully visible at first, but something about his posture, his movements, it felt too familiar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I knew him. I kept watching, replaying every frame. Then he moved to the kitchen, reaching for a drink from the cabinet. And that's when his face turned toward the camera. My heart stopped. My blood turned cold. It wasn't just anyone. It was my best friend. The man I trusted most, the man who had stood by my side during my darkest moments, was the one sneaking into my home, laughing with my wife behind my back. I rewound the footage over and over, desperate to find some explanation, some detail that would make this less painful. But there was none. The man who had patted my shoulder, reassuring me I was overthinking things, was the one stabbing me in the back. I had confided in him countless times, shared my suspicions, my pain, and every time, he told me I was being paranoid. He had laughed with me, all while making a fool out of me. I sat in silence, boiling with rage. Confronting them right away would have been too easy, too merciful. They needed to suffer, just like I had. If they thought they could play me, I was going to teach them what happens when you underestimate the wrong man. I needed a plan, something that would dismantle their lives piece by piece. And I had just the perfect idea. First, I had to make them feel safe, comfortable enough to let their guard down. So I played my part. I greeted my wife with fake smiles. I texted my so-called friend, asking him for advice as if I was still his fool. I even told him, I feel so much better now. It was my turn to mock him, and every moment of it felt incredible. Then came the perfect opportunity. I called my wife. I've got a work trip, I told her. I'll be out of town for a few days. The relief in her voice disgusted me. Okay, honey, she said sweetly, like she still cared. Take care. But I wasn't going anywhere. I stayed close, connected my hidden cameras to a live feed, and waited. Right on schedule, the front door unlocked at midnight. There they were, laughing, relaxed, and far too comfortable in my house. They had no idea what was coming. By morning, I had all the footage I needed. I copied it onto a USB drive, but I didn't stop there. One by one, I sent it to her family, her coworkers, and our mutual friends. I made sure no corner of her life was safe. No matter where they turned, undeniable proof of their betrayal stared them in the face. The fallout was brutal. Her family disowned her. Her job, gone. My ex-best friend didn't escape either. He was engaged, and when his fiancée saw the footage, she didn't scream or cry. She spat in his face and walked away without a word. He lost his career too. Both of them were unemployed, disgraced, and left with nothing but each other. But their suffering didn't stop there. As I expected, their so-called happy new life turned into a nightmare. The betrayal that brought them together ended up tearing them apart. My ex-best friend raged. I lost everything because of you. And my wife. No, my ex-wife, screamed back. I left my husband for you. You ruined me. Their shouting matches became common knowledge. People whispered about them in social circles. They spiraled into a pit of bitterness and blame, constantly pointing fingers at one another. Debt piled up, and soon they were forced to sell their belongings to stay afloat. Rumors swirled that my ex-best friend had turned to heavy drinking, and my ex-wife was seen desperately trying to cling to people who had long since turned their backs on her. They destroyed each other, and I enjoyed every second of it. Finally, I walked back into my house one last time. I grabbed my suitcase and took what little I cared about. As I reached the door, she called after me, begging me to stop, her voice trembling, her face wet with tears. But I didn't feel a thing. Not sadness, not anger, nothing at all. She wasn't the woman I once loved. She was just another stranger who threw away everything we had. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. That night wasn't just the end of a betrayal. It was the beginning of something new.